By 2014, the UFC had more than 400 full-time employees. Dana White says, and I quote, "When we started this thing, guys were at my house for holidays and shit like that. I walk around the UFC offices now, and I don't know half the people who work there. I couldn't tell you half their names, and I don't have a personal relationship with majority of the fighters like I used to," unquote. In 2014, Dana was only in the UFC offices for a few days a month. That same year, the UFC had 46 events that year. That's damn near one event per week. Don Gold says there was plenty of times when people in the offices had no clue where the fights were being broadcasted that weekend. Pay-per-view prices increased to $59.99 in 2014. In 2013, Zuffa acquired LA Boxing, which was a chain of fitness centers, and converted them into UFC gyms. They had 81 properties. Also in 2014 is when Zuffa and the EA Sports agreement happened and came out with the first UFC video game on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. They also began an agreement with a company called Future US to produce the UFC's official print magazine called UFC 360. In December that same year, Zuffa signed a $70 million deal, 6-year agreement with Reebok. Under the terms of the deal, Reebok would make something for the fighters referred to as fight kits. For each fighter in the UFC, the fight kits contain shorts, t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and shoes to wear in the octagon. Reebok also agreed to pay every fighter on a card an individual sponsorship fee in exchange for wearing their apparel that ranged anywhere from $2,500 for new fighters and $40,000 for defending champions. In 2014, only 16% of the UFC's annual revenue was going towards fighter pay salary. But in 2009, the UFC spent $67 million on fighter pay for 215 fights, which was 20 events. Then in 2014, they spent just $72 million on fighter pay for 503 fights across 46 events. So they had more than double the events than they did in 2009 and found a way to only spend an extra $5 million. Joe Silva is crushing shit with these contract negotiations. A labor law professor named Eigen described the UFC's contracts as the worst sports or entertainment agreement he had ever seen. Eigen compared their automatic extension clauses to involuntary servitude and suggested it could be a violation of the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Eigen described the contracts as, and I quote, "completely one-sided, completely unfair," unquote. 2014 was just a big year for the UFC because they added 230 new fighters to their roster, making their first debut, and just the year before that, they had their first women's fight in 2013 at the 157th UFC event with Ronda Rousey and Liz Carmouche. So that was a snowball effect. The author compares the UFC to a staffing agency, saying that there would be new fighters that would perform well for a few fights, then basically vanish and disappear, and then replaced by another group of new fighters. UFC generated $450 million that year. That's $500 million. In an interview, Lorenzo Fertitta was asked about how the UFC pays its fighters and why don't the fighters get paid as much as other athletes in other sporting events. And Lorenzo defended himself by saying it's unfair to compare the UFC to other sporting leagues because the UFC is newer. Plus, unlike the NFL and boxing promotions, the UFC pays for their own production costs, while companies like the NFL rely on their broadcasting partners to pay for their production costs. Pretty much, if you want to make money in the UFC, you literally have to fight your way to the top. You can be a lower tier fighter and still make okay money. I think the lower tier guys make between $2,000 and $4,000 per fight. Then even the lower tier guys still get paid at least $2,500 from Reebok for sponsorship deals. But if you want to be a millionaire, then you have to get that belt and be a champion. Time for some shenanigans. Longtime cut man Jacob Stitch Duran was asked about how he felt about the Reebok sponsor deal on Twitter. Jacob replied saying, and I quote, "Brother, I lost everything regarding sponsors, from pay to a nice vest. Now I have no fees and a generic vest," unquote. One day later, he was fired. Zuffa told Duran they would no longer need his services as a cut man. Duran was shocked he was let go and was hurt, and would later say Dana has definitely changed. It used to be a fighter-friendly environment. Now it's all about economics. Dana White said he didn't have anything to do with the UFC cut man's termination. Dana White says, and I quote, "We weren't friends. We're not friends. And no, he shouldn't have been expecting me to call him. And if he's my friend, why didn't he reach out to me?" Unquote. The Fertitta Station Casino CEOs had come out of Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, and Nevada's bankruptcy court made a deal to write off $4 billion of debt owed to the company's investors. So there was a lot of people that were mad as fuck. The courts allowed the Fertittas to buy back 11 of Station's properties for $772 million, in which $455 million of that was paid for by the Fertittas taking out even more loans from Deutsche Bank, Colony Capital, and others. These guys must be good at talking shit, because how the hell do you get a loan for $500 million after you couldn't pay back the $4 billion in loans that you got from some other people who invested in your company, then filed bankruptcy protection and got the court system to say you no longer have to pay those people back? Beats the shit out of me. Then check this out. That group of people who invested the $2.8 billion originally into the Fertitta Station plan were offered by the courts to invest even more money into buying a 15% stake for $100 million post-bankruptcy for Station's new plan, in hopes of that in the future the profits might offset some of their previous losses. Bro, why would I invest in your company twice when you didn't even pay me back the first time? This shit's crazy. With even more shenanigans for you, there is a job union group in Las Vegas, Nevada called the Culinary Union Local 226, and their union is 60,000 strong currently. They have members of their union in almost every major casino on the Las Vegas Strip: Caesars Palace, the Bellagio, the MGM Grand, the Mandalay Bay, the Luxor, Treasure Island, Circus, Paris, Las Vegas, and the Tropicana. They hold positions at these casinos and hotels as housekeepers, cooks, bartenders, bellhops, hotel workers, and more. And when they feel that management in these companies aren't acting right, then they will go on strike for as long as it takes until management caves in and agrees to their terms. Back when they were just 18,000 strong, the Culinary Union Local 226 holds the record for the longest labor strike in American history. At the Frontier Hotel and Casino, they maintained an active picket line for 24 hours a day for 6 years, 4 months, and 10 days, from September 21st, 1991 to February 1st, 1998, for 2,325 days straight, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They maintained a picket line, alternating people on strike for 6 years straight, until the owner of the resort ultimately gave in and sold the resort to a man named Phil Ruffin, who negotiated a contract with the union that brought the original workers back to their jobs with full benefits and pay. So you see where I'm going with this. Fertitta Station casinos had more than 13,000 employees, and the Culinary Union Local 226 welcomed Station casinos employees to join their union. It was a win-win for them, and it would add to their already 60,000 members. So basically, when they heard Zuffa was trying to buy Strikeforce, meanwhile people were getting laid off at Station's casinos, they were like, well, how do you have the money to buy Strikeforce, but you don't have the money to pay your employees? So in 2011, the Culinary Union wrote a letter to the Federal Trade Commission claiming that the Zuffa Strikeforce deal would violate United States antitrust laws. Reason being, it would eliminate the industry's last major competitor, leaving the UFC with near total control over both the marketplace and its fighters. So they were looking for any reason to try to stop the Fertittas from making that Strikeforce deal, because kinda didn't have anything to do with them, but it kinda does. But anyway, in 2012, the Federal Trade Commission closed that investigation anyway, saying that they determined there was no further action necessary to be taken. Lastly, in the interview on the subject, Lorenzo Fertitta says, and I quote, "The reality is the UFC is the ultimate place of capitalism, and you earn if you're successful. If you're a fighter and you become successful and you're the guy or girl that's bringing people to come watch the show and are buying pay-per-views, the last conversation we're going to have is about money," unquote.